May your day and your entire week be profoundly blessed as you join us for this deep dive.
Mhm.
Because today, we are unpacking what is basically a terrifying, covert transition of power.
Yeah, a really massive, dramatic shift.
Exactly. So imagine the board of a Fortune 500 company, right?
Yeah.
And they decide to fire their erratic, heavily armed CEO.
Right, which is already a nightmare scenario.
Oh, total nightmare. But instead of calling a press conference, they send this, terrified auditor out to a remote countryside branch to secretly hire a teenage junior employee to take his place.
It's wild to think about it in those terms.
It is, but that is exactly the kind of massive ancient shift in power we are exploring today. We are looking at the fall of one king, the rise of another, and, what it fundamentally teaches us about the deeply flawed ways we evaluate leadership.
Yeah, and to pull back the curtain on this, we're drawing from the incredibly rich notes of the Holman and NAA study Bibles.
Great resources.
Really great. We're focusing their historical, cultural, and theological lenses squarely on the 16th chapter of 1 Samuel. And the material here, it highlights this brutal contrast between our human expectations of what a leader should look like on the outside and, well, the divine reality of what a leader actually needs to be on the inside.
Okay, so to jump in, the narrative starts not with some grand royal decree, but with a paralyzed prophet. God essentially confronts the prophet Samuel and tells him to, stop mourning for King Saul.
Because Saul has completely disqualified himself at this point.
Right, he has been rejected from leading Israel because of his continued rebellion. So the directive from God is clear. He says, fill your horn with oil, go down to the small town of Bethlehem, and anoint one of the sons of a man named Jesse as the new king.
And Samuel's reaction to this mission is just sheer panic.
Total panic.
He tells God that if Saul hears about this, he will be executed. And we really have to, strip away the Sunday school flannel graph image of King Saul to understand that panic.
Oh, absolutely.
Saul is not just a political opponent who might write a nasty letter. He is an unstable, paranoid monarch with a standing army.
Yeah, he is violently protective of his throne.
Exactly. Samuel knows that crossing into another territory to anoint a rival king is literal treason. It's an immediate death sentence. I mean, Saul had already proven he would turn on his closest allies.
Which means God has to provide a cover story to keep Samuel alive.
Right.
God tells Samuel to take a heifer with him and simply say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord.
And what's fascinating here is the ethical study note our sources provide regarding this exact moment. Because modern readers, they often trip over this.
Yeah, they assume God is instructing a prophet to lie.
Exactly. But the theological notes clarify the ancient ethical framework at play here. Samuel is offering a completely true statement.
Because he really is going to perform a sacrifice.
Right. He is going to perform a sacrifice in Bethlehem, but he is concealing his primary explosive purpose. The notes explain that withholding information from an unfaithful, dangerous tyrant is morally justified.
Wow.
Saul had forfeited his right to total transparency through his own treachery.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we actually see this dynamic play out in high-stakes environments today. It goes back to that corporate auditor analogy I mentioned.
Right.
If an auditor is sent by a board to investigate a highly toxic, corrupt branch office...
Run by a paranoid manager.
Exactly, a guy who fires anyone who threatens his power. The auditor doesn't walk in the front door and announce the impending termination.
No, of course not.
They walk in and announce an annual fire safety seminar. They fulfill a legitimate function, keeping the volatile manager calm while conducting the real mission completely under the radar.
Because you are protecting the mission and the innocent people involved by not detonating a bomb unnecessarily.
And the innocent people in Bethlehem are already terrified. I mean, I can't get over the reaction of the town elders when Samuel finally arrives.
Oh, yeah, it's so telling.
The text says these older, respected leaders literally tremble at his approach, asking, "Do you come in peace?" It paints such a vivid picture of just how suffocating Saul's failing regime has become. They assume they're about to become collateral damage.
Living under a volatile leader creates this palpable atmosphere of dread. If the most powerful religious figure in the nation suddenly shows up in your dusty little outpost,
You assume the worst.
you absolutely assume you're caught in a crossfire. They know Saul's wrath. If Saul even suspects Bethlehem is harboring Samuel or plotting a coup, he wouldn't hesitate to wipe the town off the map.
Yeah.
So Samuel has to de-escalate the situation immediately, using that sacrifice as the official, peaceful reason for his visit.
So once the panic subsides, Samuel gets to work. He forces Jesse and his sons through a sanctification process.
Which is a big deal.
Yeah, he doesn't just call a quick meeting. He puts the whole family through a rigorous, solemn purification involving washing clothes, ritual bathing, spiritual preparation. He is setting a massive stage.
He really is.
And then the vetting process for the next king of Israel begins, which immediately exposes the ultimate flaw in human hiring practices.
Oh, man, it totally does.
Because the oldest son, Eliab, steps forward. He is tall, he is imposing, he has absolute LinkedIn headshot energy.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
Right, and Samuel takes one look at him and thinks, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. The great prophet falls for the aesthetic instantly.
And God's response to Samuel's immediate infatuation is one of the most paradigm-shifting mandates in historical text. God rejects Eliab on the spot.
Just immediately.
Immediately, telling Samuel not to look at his appearance or his stature. The mandate is clear. Humans look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart.
Okay, I want to push back on human nature a little bit here, because we have thousands of years of historical proof that the tallest, most conventionally attractive candidate often fails miserably when given actual power.
We have so much proof of that, yes.
Yet we are still instinctively wired to trust aesthetic presentation over hidden moral intellect. Like, modern studies constantly show that taller people get the promotion, they win the election, they secure the CEO spot. Why do we continuously fall into Samuel's exact trap?
Well, it really boils down to a deeply ingrained cognitive bias known as the halo effect.
The halo effect.
Yeah. We neurologically assume that if someone possesses one highly visible positive trait, like physical impressiveness or height, they must naturally possess a whole host of other invisible positive traits.
Like competence or integrity?
Exactly. Emotional intelligence, all of that. Ancient Israel demanded a king who looked like the intimidating warlords of the surrounding nations. They wanted someone who projected physical dominance.
Because that's what makes you feel safe.
Right. It takes immense discipline to look past that superficial armor and evaluate the actual engine driving the person.
And we really need to clarify what that engine actually is, because when we use the word heart today, it sounds like a Valentine's Day card.
It does.
We mean someone who is highly emotional or sweet or empathetic.
But the study notes are very explicit about this ancient Hebrew context. In this scriptural setting, the heart has nothing to do with romantic or sentimental emotions.
Okay, so what does it mean?
It refers to the moral and spiritual intellect. It is the command center of the individual, the seat of the will, of reason, and of ethical decision-making. Yet God is evaluating how this man processes moral choices when no one is watching, how his intellect aligns with truth.
Which makes Eliab's height a massive red herring.
A total distraction. And remember, the current king, Saul, was originally chosen in part because he was literally head and shoulders taller than anyone else in Israel.
Oh, that's right.
So God is subtly reminding Samuel that the nation already tried hiring the tallest guy in the room, and it resulted in a paranoid tyrant who is currently driving the country into the ground.
That brings us back to the incredible awkwardness in Jesse's living room. Because God rejects Eliab, then Abinadab steps up, rejected. Shammah steps up, rejected.
And it's worth noting, these older brothers are literal soldiers in Saul's army.
Right, they have the resumes.
They do.
So 7 impressive sons parade by, and God rejects every single one of them. Samuel is just standing there with a horn full of oil, completely out of candidates, having to tell Jesse that the Lord hasn't chosen any of them.
Which forces Samuel to look where absolutely no one else in the room thought to look.
Right.
He asks Jesse if all the young men are present.
And Jesse has to admit that the youngest is out tending the sheep.
They didn't even bother to invite him to the sacrifice.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because the study notes point out a strange discrepancy here. 1 Samuel implies David is the 8th son, since 7 passed by before him. But a later historical record in 1 Chronicles lists David as the 7th son.
Yeah, that discrepancy is a practice called condensation.
Condensation?
Yeah, it's really common in ancient genealogies. It's highly likely one of the brothers died young without leaving any heirs, so his name was simply omitted from later historical records.
Oh, I see.
But this seemingly minor academic detail, it perfectly underscores David's status in the family.
Yeah.
He was so far down the totem pole, so utterly insignificant to the power structure, that depending on which historical record you read, his actual birth order gets blurry.
Wow.
He is the definition of a nobody.
The modern parallel is almost like a dark comedy. Imagine that board of directors flying in to find the new CEO, right? The executive team lines up all the vice presidents in their $1,000 suits.
Yeah.
The board rejects them all and asks if there is anyone else. And management sheepishly admits there is a junior data analyst, but they left him off the calendar invite because someone needed to go do a coffee run.
Exactly.
David was doing the dirty, invisible grunt work of the family.
And we need to reframe our mental image of that grunt work, too. The notes emphasize the brutal reality of ancient Bedouin shepherding.
Because we usually picture like a serene boy sitting on a grassy hill playing a flute surrounded by fluffy sheep.
Right. But in the harsh, unforgiving Judean wilderness, a shepherd was a frontline defender. It was an actively violent, isolating job. You were protecting your flock from severe weather, thieves, and apex predators like lions and bears.
With just a staff and a sling.
Exactly. David was out in the wilderness fighting for his life. That isolated environment was secretly forging him into a lethal warrior and a brilliant tactician long before he ever saw a battlefield.
So they finally send for this forgotten shepherd, and when David walks in, the text delivers this wonderful bit of irony. God just got done lecturing Samuel about not looking at outward appearances. But the moment David arrives, the narrative goes out of its way to describe him as having a ruddy complexion, beautiful eyes, and a handsome appearance.
Well, the text isn't implying that physical beauty is inherently bad or disqualifying.
Right.
It's simply establishing that his looks were not the criteria for his selection. David just happened to be handsome. But it was his hidden moral intellects forged out there in the dangerous pastures that qualified him. God tells Samuel, "Arise, anoint him, for this is he."
And the moment Samuel tips that horn of oil over David's head, right in the middle of his older, heavily armed, and probably very confused brothers.
Oh, they had to be so confused.
The text says, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon David from that day forward. It is an immediate, explosive transfer of divine empowerment, but it sets up a terrifying thematic shift.
It really does.
Because at the exact moment the Spirit empowers David in Bethlehem, a catastrophic spiritual vacuum occurs miles away in the palace.
Yeah, the narrative violently cuts from the secret anointing of the shepherd to the crumbling reign of the king. We're told that the Spirit of the Lord departs from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord begins to torment him.
Our sources provide a striking comparison chart between these two men at this precise juncture. They are moving in completely opposite trajectories.
Completely.
Saul becomes jealous, treacherous, a failed warrior who loses his dynasty. David is anointed, becomes known as a loyal friend, a mighty warrior, and is promised an eternal kingdom. But I have to admit, I struggle with the theology of Saul's decline.
This raises an important question, one that theologians have wrestled with for centuries.
Yeah.
Because the phrasing, "an evil spirit from the Lord," is incredibly difficult for a modern reader to process.
Yeah.
Like, does God create evil? Does he dispatch demons to torture people?
It sounds like God is the author of the abuse. How do the study notes reconcile that phrasing?
Well, the notes guide us into the ancient mindset regarding absolute divine sovereignty. The biblical authors viewed God as sovereign over every single entity in the universe. They suggest we shouldn't view this as God authoring evil, but rather utilizing a distressing spirit or an evil agent as an instrument of just judgment against Saul's continued arrogant rebellion.
Okay, that makes sense in that context.
Yeah, and some commentators view it as a severe mercy, like a psychological breaking designed to force a rebellious tyrant to reflect and repent. By removing his protective, empowering spirit, God leaves Saul entirely vulnerable to his own internal darkness and paranoia.
It makes you think deeply about the crushing psychological weight of leadership when the mandate is gone. Like, how does this immediate internal torment reflect the reality of a leader who realizes their authority has become completely hollow?
Oh, it's profound.
Because Saul still wears the physical crown, he still commands the armies, he sits on the literal throne, but internally he is crumbling under the weight of his own imposter syndrome.
And we witness this exact psychological collapse in leaders today. People who cling to the title but have entirely lost the moral authority or the vision that got them there in the first place.
Yeah, the isolation that follows is absolute torture.
It is. Saul is surrounded by advisors and yes men, but he knows he's failing. His torment is the terrifying realization that the power he is violently trying to protect is already slipping through his fingers.
And the torment becomes so unbearable that his staff desperately seeks a remedy. They're watching their commander-in-chief lose his mind, and they suggest basically music therapy.
Right.
They advise Saul to find a skilled harp player to soothe his nervous system when these dark, terrifying moods hit.
And this is where the narrative turns into a masterclass in historical irony, because one of Saul's young servants speaks up and recommends someone specific. He doesn't just say he knows a kid who plays the harp. He delivers a glowing resume.
He really does.
He describes David as a skilled musician, a man of valor, a man of war, sensible in speech, handsome, and most importantly, he notes that the Lord is with him.
If we look at the timeline, David has already returned to the sheep after being anointed. He didn't march to the capital. He went back to work.
Back to the grunt work.
Right. So Jesse loads up a donkey with bread, a skin of wine, and a young goat, and sends his youngest son off to the palace.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, God is using the very torment of the current king to issue a royal summons to the future king.
So what does this all mean? Saul literally initiates his own transition of power.
Yes.
He's drowning in anxiety, so he unknowingly hires his own successor to come into his inner sanctum and play music to keep him sane.
It's unbelievable.
And David is so effective at it that Saul loves him greatly. Saul actually makes David his armor bearer, and I want you listening to really sit with the sheer proximity required for that job. David is physically carrying the weapons of the man who currently sits on the throne that David has just been anointed to take.
The intimacy of that dynamic is staggering. I mean, an armor bearer was the most trusted guard in the king's detail. David is standing in the king's private chambers.
Right there in the room with him.
When the evil spirit paralyzes Saul, David plays the harp, bringing him relief. The anointed shepherd becomes the only source of peace for the doomed king. And all the while, David is getting a front row seat to the inner workings of the royal court, military strategy, and palace politics.
Getting paid for it, too.
Yeah, he is receiving his royal education on Saul's payroll.
It is a beautiful, almost terrifying symmetry. When you step back and look at the whole picture we've unpacked today, we started with a fearful prophet sneaking into a small town under the cover of a routine sacrifice, looking for a king among the tall, the impressive, and the resume-heavy.
Yep.
And we end with a humble, music-playing shepherd who had been forgotten in a violent pasture, now standing in the center of the royal palace. He is holding the weapons of the very king he will replace, providing the only cure that king can find.
It's a profound reminder that real power and real leadership often develop in the brutal, unseen pastures of life, long before they are ever recognized in the palace.
Yeah.
And the very systems or people that appear to be completely in control,
Like Saul.
are often unwittingly paving the way for their own replacements.
It is profound. And it leaves us with something really challenging to think about.
Yeah, the most compelling question this history raises for us today is this. If the very thing that brings Saul the most comfort in his darkest, most tormented moments, the music of this young shepherd,
Right.
if that comfort is actually the instrument of his ultimate replacement, how closely should we be examining the cures and the comforts we invite into our own lives? Sometimes the very thing soothing our anxiety is actually the harbinger of a massive change we can't even see coming.
Wow. Let that sit with you as you go through your week. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. God blesses all of you listening today. Until next time, keep looking past the surface.